podcast. Today we are doing part 2 of the silver era of Disney animation movies. So definitely make sure you check out part 1 because that's going to have the first 4 movies and some like history backstory into like, you know, from the wartime era into the silver era for Disney animation movies. So now we're going to get right into part 2, which I'm super excited for. We'd like to show you how to break this up into 2 parts because there were 8 movies. We have 4 and 4, of course. And there was so much detail on this next movie that at this point when I was finishing it up, I was like, either I'm going to cut a lot out or we're just going to have to do a part 2.
Can't wait to see which one.
So, all right. So a quick recap. The last movie that came out was in 1955 was Lady and the Tramp. And the next Disney animation movie didn't come out until 1959. So almost 4 years until the next movie. So what do you think that came out in 1959?
I have no idea anymore because like I said, they were all re-released at different days and different ages that I was. So I have no idea.
So as a hint, it's the 3rd Disney princess.
Was it Sleeping Beauty?
Yep, it is Sleeping Beauty.
Okay.
So Disney first considered animating Charles Perrault's 1697 fairy tale Sleeping Beauty back in 1938. After the success of Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty was brought back into full production in full earnest in 1950. Disney thought Sleeping Beauty would be the pinnacle of the animation studio and pulled many resources for this film to happen. The storyboard artists made quite a few changes from the original fairy tale, such as disregarding the entire second half of the fairy tale, and they only focused on the sleeping curse and the climatic wake-up kiss. Apparently in the original fairy tale, she actually gets fully married, and there's a whole, like in the second half of the fairy tale is about her being married, basically. But again, they decide only to focusing on the sleeping curse and like getting on the kiss, basically. They also reduced the fairy count from 8 to 4. They basically just consolidated a lot of the fairies, and they also expanded on the fairies' roles a little bit too, since some of them didn't really do anything in the film, in the original book.
They couldn't
and some of them did a lot. So, all right, in 1952, the storyboard artist felt like they were done with the film, but then when Disney reviewed, he rejected the whole thing, saying that it was too similar to the other movies they had already done, specifically to Snow White. So other storylines that ended up getting cut from the film included the prince and the princess meeting via a treasure hunt, which would have been interesting. Another where the fairies ruled over their own dominion, so they all like, you know, dominion of like forest or something like that. And they had whole like little plots with that. And there were all these other like visual gags that they had, you know, with the fairies too. And eventually Disney felt like they were more appropriate for maybe a short film rather than a full-length feature film. And he also felt like all the things with the fairies was distracting from like the main plot, basically. The storyboard artists struggled to differentiate their third princess Aurora from Snow White and Cinderella at this point. So eventually they settled on giving her more of a modern personality and having her lured by Maleficent to the cursed spindle. And they also wanted Philip the prince to be more realistic and more plot-centric too, since again in Snow White and Cinderella, well, in Cinderella the prince is a little bit more agency, but in Snow White he's really just there.
He just shows up.
He just shows up at the end and takes her away on a horse, right? So it took them 3 years to cast the voice for Aurora, and Mary Costa was ended up being cast as the voice for Aurora, but she actually almost lost the role because she was from the South and had a very strong Southern accent, and they wanted her to do a convincing British accent, and she could do it, but at the time they weren't sure if she could do it, but she ended up pulling it off, right? So good for Mary Costa. Sleeping Beauty was originally slated to come out in 1955, the same year as Lady and the Tramp, but there were many severe production delays that pushed it back year after year until it eventually came out in January of 1959. So remember, the storyboarding started in 1950 and then the production started in 1953. Disney was originally unsatisfied with Aurora and Philip's meeting in the forest scene, and this caused significant delays as the scene had to be rewritten many times until Disney finally approved of it. Also during this time in the early 50s, if we're being honest, Disney's attention started to get taken up by other projects, right? Such as the television series The Mickey Mouse Club.
Had all that stuff going on.
And he actually also pulled a lot of the animators from Sleeping Beauty into the TV shows, such as, again, the Mickey Mouse Club. Disney was also famously building Disneyland theme park at this time too. So even though the production of the movie was still going along, again, albeit slowly, Disney still wanted to name the castle in the theme park Sleeping Beauty Castle to help promote the movie when the movie would come out. So this also means that there is a 4-year gap from when Disneyland opened in 1955 to when Sleeping Beauty came out, in which the castle in the park was named after in 1959. This is a pretty long time to have a titular castle in your theme park, the main thing to come see, right? The movie's not even out yet for years. Also to note, one of the lead animators had a heart attack and he had to be replaced. I think he was okay. He just couldn't work anymore. So,
yeah, good to hear.
And in 1956, the storyboard was reapproved by Disney and production began again. So it took them 4 years to reapprove this storyboard, right? 3 years, sorry. 3 years for the storyboard to be reapproved. But part of the reason for many of these delays was because of Disney himself, right? He insisted on being a part of the film and wanted to approve of every little aspect of this film. Control. But at the same time, though, his attention was in Disneyland, was on the TV, the TV shows. So many of the animators are blaming Disney himself for all these delays that they kept having. So Disney wanted the film to take a different approach when it came to artistic design as well and differentiate it from their other films. So Disney envisioned a moving illustration to be the inspiration of this film. So again, another long story short here, because there's a lot of information on the artistic background of this film, but the style of the Unicorn Tapestry series is what eventually inspired the overall artistic direction for Sleeping Beauty. With this pre-Renaissance Northern European art style, along with Gothic and Persian medieval tapestries, the look for Sleeping Beauty came together. And this is interesting because if you watch Sleeping Beauty next to Cinderella, for instance, you do see that stark difference between that Mary Blair type of look and then again this
they have two different feels.
Yeah, this Renaissance Northern European tapestry type style look as well. So Disney hired Ivan Earl to ensure that the entirety of the film was under the same visual appearance. And Earl created literally hundreds of paintings and sketches and scenes for the film. And when I say hundreds, it was like 300 to 400 paintings and sketches that he created for inspiration for the film, for things to pull for the film.
The animation.
So the other animators were both impressed and annoyed at Earl's work because they were impressed by his style, but they worried that this type of style didn't fit in with that fairy tale feature. And they also struggled a little bit to match his style since it was very different from the things that they worked on before, to the point they even complained to Disney about it. But Disney loved this style for the film so much, he basically said that they had to assimilate and said, you assimilated to Mary Blair's style for Cinderella, you can assimilate to this style too for Sleeping Beauty. So Earl prompted Disney to film the movie on the Super Technirama 70, and this made the first animated film featured to do so. And of course, this presented some challenges, as with any new animation technology. But as the Xerox process would be the next major film innovation, and that is what they would switch to after Sleeping Beauty, it meant that Sleeping Beauty was the last hand-inked Disney animated feature film, where basically almost every cell was hand-inked by an animator. So, all right, so like other films, the live-action sequencing was used yet again to animate this film, and Helene Stanley was brought back for Aurora as well too. But this time they had her in full costume as well, like full colored costume and everything.
Oh, so not just the sequence.
Yep, so not just sequencing, she was in full costume, and she also live sequenced some of the fairy scenes as well too. Now, some of the animators didn't love that she was in a full costume because they kind of wanted their own creativity to do what they wanted to do, so to speak. But this is also why we have a lot of footage from Helene Stanley as Aurora.
I was going to say, where is that footage? Because I would think that
you can find it. It's pretty readily available if you just kind of Google it. And so it is really cool to see her again doing a lot of these iconic scenes from Sleeping Beauty, because again, we don't really have a lot from Cinderella since she wasn't in costume for Cinderella.
Yeah, it was just somebody doing the movement.
Yep. All right, so there is a lot of information online about the character animation and the writing of the songs for Sleeping Beauty. But again, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip some of it and only focus on a few things. Specifically, I thought the one that was the most interesting was Maleficent, because Maleficent was a very unique character for the animators to design. So Mark Davis, again, we've heard his name before, he was tasked with doing both Aurora and Maleficent. So Maleficent's animation design was influenced by a painting in the Czechoslovakian art book that he found in his home library. Original designs had red trim on Maleficent's costume to highlight its flame-like shape, but Earl actually asked him to change it to lavender because he thought red would be too strong of like a contrast in the scene, so it was changed to lavender, and as well as the green too that they always use for their bad guys is green. Davis also added horns and a collar resembling bat wings to give the character a more diabolical look, and endowed her costume with that reptilian quality to foreshadow her dragon form later on in the film. So animating Maleficent was challenging for Davis specifically because of the character's tendency to soliloquize, right? Yeah, she tended to just stand and talk to no one.
Yes.
And her lack of physical contact with other characters was tricky, again, to animate a character who just kind of stood and talked and didn't interact with anyone. But what helped a little bit was the introduction of Diablo, which was Maleficent's raven. Right. And so once he had a raven, he could kind of, again, have her bounce off a little bit with another character or something else in the scene, so she wasn't just standing there talking to herself.
Statue.
And to note, Maleficent's dragon form was animated by Eric Cleworth, and he based the head movements of the dragon on a rattlesnake. All right, so as for the music for this film, originally they wanted to use, I always struggle to pronounce this word, Tchaikovsky's 1889. Tchaikovsky. I know, I always struggle to say his name. Yeah. Tchaikovsky's 1889 ballet to be the score. But then they thought maybe the score would be too difficult to adapt into like a screen for like an animated movie. So some original songs were written for the movie, but Disney was still really sold on the idea of using Tchaikovsky's ballet score. So animators and story artists worked for 3 years to make the score, to make it work for the film, to use Tchaikovsky's ballet score and to, again, adapt it for this film. All right, so Sleeping Beauty was released on January 23rd, 1959. Since it was filmed in that special Super Technirama 70 format, it could only be released in specific theaters. With a budget of $6 million, it was the most expensive film that they had made so far, and took almost 10 years to produce. Again, 1950s when they started, 1959 as it was released, and the film only grossed $5.2 million in its initial run, and it was considered a box office bomb, right?
Wow.
So considered a bomb. Even though the previous films had done well, they'd only done at this point 5 films in 10 years, and with Sleeping Beauty's underperformance, Disney has started to lose his interest in animation. 1960 then also became the first year that the animation studio had a fiscal loss in a decade, and this caused many layoffs to happen throughout the animation department. So again, Sleeping Beauty was such a bomb that, again, it was almost the close of the animation studio, right? So eventually we know Sleeping Beauty became one of the highest grossing films and one of the most famous for Disney animation production and for the Disney company itself. But of course, at the time, that was not the case. It was still nominated for Best Scoring of a Musical Picture, and in 2020, it was inducted into the National Film Registry, the way Cinderella had been inducted as well. So crazy that it was such a box office bomb that the animation studio almost closed to be inducted into the National Film Registry years and years later. So just wild to think about that. So, all right, so we just had the bomb in 1959. So what is going to follow it up in 1961? We have 101 Dalmatians.
Okay. That's just about when I was old enough to understand what was going on.
Yes, you would have been like, what, 6?
6. Yeah.
So the children's novel, The 101 Dalmatians by Dodie Smith, had been published on November 19th, 1956, and the children's novel was an immediate success. So Charles Brackett was brought to the studio. So Charles Brackett brought the story to Disney's attention in 1957, and they acquired the film rights that year for $25,000. Which is just under $300,000 today to get the film rights. Disney liked the idea immediately for 101 Dalmatians. So at the time, Sleeping Beauty was still in production, but 101 Dalmatians was slated to be the immediate next film for it. Slated to finish in 2 years. Of course, it took a little bit longer though. So now we have Bill Peet. Bill Peet was assigned to write the screenplay and the storyboard and became the first Disney animated film to be written solely by one person. So it was the first film also to have a complete
That's probably why it went faster.
Yeah, it was also the first film to have a complete screenplay approved by Disney before storyboarding, which was not common after this film anyway. It did happen for a few more films, but again, it wasn't like common practice. So Pete's really stuck to the original story pretty closely, mainly just consolidating a bunch of the characters, right? So if this is funny, so 2 of the characters that got consolidated was Corella's husband and her cat, which I thought was really funny. Two interesting 2 characters consolidate into the cat.
Okay. Husband wasn't that important.
Yeah.
Okay.
A few of the puppy storylines got condensed into Lucky, the main puppy. And originally there was a birth mother dog named Mrs. and the adopted mother dog, Perdita, and they just got combined into just Perdita. And in the book, there was also a nanny cook and a nanny butler who just got combined into a character nanny. So immediately just consolidating a lot of characters, which I think makes sense. The scene of Pongo and Perdita exchanging wedding vows, those are the 2 main dogs, at the same time as Roger and Anita, the 2 humans of the original, was original to the book, but was modified as the censor board, when they reviewed it, said they worried they could offend religious audiences to see 2 dogs repeat the same religious wedding vows as humans. Okay. So instead, they simplified the vows and had so they simplified the vows instead, rather than doing like religious wedding vows, just simplified vows. And they had Roger and Anita just dress in regular formal clothes rather than like wedding attire, so to speak. So it was a bit more simple and a bit more casual in that sense. But they still wanted to keep that scene in, of course. An original ending had Roger selling his song about Corella and buying Hell Hall to turn into a Dalmatian plantation, with Pongo and Perdita expecting more puppies, but this ended up being cut mainly just for timing, and the movie simply ends with the Dalmatians reuniting with their owners after they escape from Corella. So basically what we know today. Disney was not actually heavily involved in this film as he had been with the others. This is the first very hands-off film. Yep, so again, he was present for story meetings and wanted to be involved with the story, but again, the story was basically the book, so it wasn't really changing all that much from the book. Right. He had Pete send his drawings for the animated film to the children's book author, to Smith, and she wrote back saying that he had improved her story and his designs looked better than her illustrations in the book, which is funny to see because the original Peter Pan actor from last episode didn't want anything to do with Peter Pan. To do with the... Yet the author here was just like, this is wonderful, this is really great. Yeah. So love to see that. So they deliberately sought out voice actors with deeper voices for the dogs, as to show how the dogs had more power and agency in the scenes than the humans did. Rod Taylor was the first to be cast as Pongo, with Lisa Daniels being cast as Perdita shortly after. However, Lisa Daniels ended up getting married and moved away from California to New York, so the rest of her scenes ended up being done by Kate Bauer instead. So after Sleeping Beauty's box office bomb, there's discussion about closing the animation studio down. The expense of the movies was a really big factor in this, but of course, animation is where it all started, so Disney didn't want to close the studio, even though he was considering maybe slowing down on the studio instead. And this is when we had, again, this huge innovation within animation, right? So we had Ub Iwerks as the one who helped turn this all around. So Urwix and Ken Anderson are the main two players who kind of figured this out. So Urwix had been experimenting with Xerox photography to aid in animation. He used a Xerox camera to transfer drawings by animators directly to animation cells. That eliminated the entire inking process and thus saving time and money while still preserving that detail and finesse of like the penciled elements of when you're actually drawing. It still had limitations such as the inability to deviate from a black sketchy outline, and it still lacked that fine lavish quality of something being hand drawn, of course. So they experimented with this Xerox process with Sleeping Beauty for the thorn forest scene, and they then used it for a short called Goliath 2 in 1960 to see like if it would work. And then for this movie, basically the whole movie was used in the Xerox process. They said that the Xerox process was a huge help in the animation, especially for the spots on the dogs, to animate all of the dogs. So artistic director Ken Anderson was the one who made the final call to use this for the entire process of the film, and it was estimated they were able to complete the film for half of the cost of what it would have been if the animators had to hand animate all of the dogs and their spots.
Surprise, surprise. Okay.
So Disney disliked the artistic look of the film, actually, and he felt like they were losing that fantasy element of the animated film, so he didn't actually like this process at all. And he reportedly said to the animation staff that he was never going to let Ken Anderson be an art director again, because again, it was Ken Anderson, it was Ub Iwerks who kind of discovered this as a technique, but Ken Anderson was the one who made the call as artistic director to use it for 101 Dalmatians. So Disney had some mean words that he said to Anderson basically about that he would never let him be an art director again. He didn't quit, he stuck around, but Anderson didn't say anything back to him, he just kind of let it slide. And it wasn't until 1966 that Anderson saw Disney again after many years, and he said there was an understanding that passed between him and Disney that Disney didn't really mean what he said all those years ago. He was kind of just, I think, mad in the moment, but he didn't really mean it. And Anderson, as we know, in 1966 is when Disney had passed away. So as with the other films, live action sequencing was used with Mary Wickes standing in for Cruella de Vil, and the film was the first Disney animated feature film to be a non-musical. So to have some music in the film, they had Roger be a singer-songwriter. Mel Levin composed all the music in the film with 3 iterations of Cruella de Vil before it was actually approved. The Sherman brothers were actually the ones who wrote the title song 101 Dalmatians, but ironically it's actually not used in the film. So I thought that was interesting. 101 Dalmatians was released on January 25th, 1961, and this one was an immediate box office hit. People loved it. It grossed over $14 million in the US and Canada, making it the first animated film ever to gross over $10 million. It received such high praise from critics and became one of the most beloved, again, instant classic basically was this movie. So even though this revived the animation studio's financial slump, Disney again was still more interested in the live action films that he was doing as well as the Disneyland theme park and then on the feature films. And again, I'm assuming this is also why, again, years later, Disney turned to Anderson and was kind of like, I didn't mean what I said about you, because the movie was a success.
Because the movie was a success. It was the biggest grossing movie you ever
people
had.
Loved it.
Right. Obviously, people loved it.
It literally hit milestones, right? So even though Disney didn't love that style of it, and you can definitely see that style, right? When you watch 101 Dalmatians versus Sleeping Beauty and the previous film, it looks different, right? So he didn't like that look, but I actually like the look. I think that look looks so, I think it looks really classic. I think it looks great.
It's a classic look for that film. You notice it's different. Even when you said it, like when I can picture the frames, it is different. But so is some of the newer movies when they come out with the new animation and different
sometimes
things.
You have to experiment to just see, right? So now we're in 1963. So what followed up 101 Dalmatians was The Sword in the Stone. So if I say The Sword and the Stone, I apologize. It is The Sword in the Stone because the sword was inside of the stone, right? For some reason, I always want to say Sword and the Stone. So I don't know. I may end up saying that a lot. So development for Sword in the Stone began back in 1939 when Disney purchased the film rights for T.H. White's book of the same name, of course. But again, as of all other films during World War II, all these movies got shelved. Though technically during the 1940s and 50s, there was some development of this movie, but it wasn't until after the success of 101 Dalmatians in 1961 that Disney announced that this movie and Chanticleer were both in production again. So ironically enough, it was Roy Disney this time who dissuaded Disney from going into production on this film, as he felt that they had enough good films for re-releases that they didn't need to keep investing all these millions of dollars into new films. But Disney refused, but because his sights were already set on building a second theme park in the US, he also said one animated movie every 4 years was a good compromise. So again, Roy Disney was like, let's just do re-releases. Walt Disney was like, no, but let's compromise. But again, he was already building, Disney World in Florida this time,
that
right?
Would take longer.
So Chanticleer went into storyboarding, but very long story short, Disney said, you can't make a personality out of a chicken. And when it came time to approve either Chanticleer or Sword in the Stone, clearly we know which one of the two won out, right? So like 101 Dalmatians, Sword in the Stone was developed solely by Bill Peterkin. Disney approved of this film after seeing the 1960 Broadway show of Camelot, and I wonder if that's part of the reason why he also picked this one over Chanticleer. But the lead storyboard artists from Chanticleer were very annoyed at Pete at this time because they felt like his project got picked over theirs, and they were actually trying to convince Pete to convince Disney that they should still work on both films. But Pete said that he was never trying to compete with them. He was just trying to do good work and ultimately please Disney himself. So again, Chanticleer, of course, was not made. Yep. So the first screenplay was expanded upon to give some more drama and some more exciting scenes of the story, as well with that little extra sprinkle of drama. Disney approved of that final screenplay. Ricky Sorensen was cast as Arthur, the little boy, but he went through puberty in the middle of production. So the director Wolfgang Reitherman cast his two sons, Richard and Robert Reitherman, to replace them. And this results in some noticeable differences of voices between scenes and also between the same scene. So they also gave Arthur an American accent, which contrasted from the English setting of the story. So I thought this would also be a really good time to note that basically almost all of the films in the Silver Era up until now have been set in Europe and mainly in an English setting, right? We got Cinderella in Europe, in English setting, Alice in Wonderland, Europe, English setting, Peter Pan, Europe, English setting, Sleeping Beauty, Europe, English setting, 101 Dalmatians in Europe, that's place in London. Sorry, Lady and the Tramp was New England, right?
I was going to say, I thought that was...
So yeah, that's what I'm saying. Okay. All set place in Europe, mainly in England, with Lady and the Tramp taking place in New England. So still again, similar style, right?
Well, let me tell you, I just came back from New England, from Cape Cod, and I never knew how much of a European influence there is in Cape Cod, especially French. So
I just thought that was very funny. They really were inspired by the Europeans for this era, except for when we get to the last film, we'll see that it's not European film at all. They used the same Xerox method to animate this film, as well as a new animation touch-up technique. So this new animation touch-up technique allowed the cleanup process to be done a lot faster. So with this cleanup process, the animation assistants would draw directly on the animator's sketches rather than doing a full transfer of the sketch onto basically a new piece of paper. So while it was streamlining the process a lot faster, some of the lead animators worried that this could ruin their line work since you had someone else drawing on top of your own work technically. But animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston were still so proud of the work in this film that they stated that some of the best animation is scattered throughout this overall film. I will admit, I have not seen The Sword in the Stone in many, many years. So The Sword in the Stone was released on December 12th, 1963 and earned $4.7 million. While it was considered successful at the time, it wasn't as widely successful as 101 Dalmatians. It also received mixed critic reviews, as some felt that the narrative was a bit too thin and hard to follow along. But it still was nominated for the Academy Awards for Best Scoring of a Music Adaptation or Treatment, and the story continues to influence many Disney storylines today, though arguably it isn't as popular as some of the movies in this era.
I was going to say, it never was.
I think what's popular from this movie is that idea, again, the book, so to speak, right, of that Sword in the Stone, that idea with Merlin and Arthur and everything. That storyline is very infamous, but this movie specifically is not, right? So again, that idea lives on, but the movie low-key just didn't. All right, but that brings us now to 1967, our final movie of the Silver Era, the Silver Age. In 1967, of course, too, this is the movie came out post Disney's passing, so technically Sword in the Stone was the last animated feature to come out before Disney's passing, although this next movie is the last movie that Disney himself worked on before his passing, and that movie is The Jungle Book. Disney considered making an animated version of Rudyard Kipling's 1894 collection of stories in The Jungle Book in the late 1930s. After working on The Sword in the Stone, Bill Peet proposed The Jungle Book to be the studio's next feature. He thought it had some great animal characters that could be developed. Disney agreed and acquired their film rights for this in 1962. I thought this was interesting to note too, that up until now, a lot of these other stories that they had all been thoughts that Disney had wanted to work on from years and years past, but didn't get a chance to because of the war. And now we're kind of getting to that era where he's sort of done all those stories now, and now we're getting to new things, right? So Pete went on to storyboarding immediately. The novel itself was more episodic, so Pete worked to make the story more linear while adding a little bit more drama and suspense into the overall story. And he also worked in Mowgli's story from The Jungle Book back to the Man Village to be the central storyline, right? So he wanted Mowgli. Mowgli, of course, was always the central character, but again, that story, he had to make it more linear, follow a singular plot. His major difference from the original work was making Baloo's character more playful and giving that more serious mentor role to Bagheera. He also created King Louie as an original character, so King Louie is not in the book at all. So because of the critical response to Sword in the Stone, Disney wanted to be more involved with The Jungle Book. So again, Disney was a little bit more hands-off with 101 Dalmatians and Sword in the Stone. Again, Sword in the Stone, 101 Dalmatians, great. Sword in the Stone, not so great. So Disney was like, let me come back to Jungle Book a little bit to oversee a little bit. He felt that Pete's first drafts were too dark and depressing, and he wanted to make it more more lighter and focused on that family dynamic of Mowgli with the, all the animals. But Pete disagreed, and they disagreed so much this started a year-long argument between them to the point that Pete left the studio. So kind of crazy. Disney apparently insulted him when he said that Pete should see Mary Poppins, which came out in 1964, for some real entertainment. And then Pete left the studio, right? So after Pete left, Disney assigned Larry Clemens as the new writer for the Jungle Book. He didn't want Clemens basing the story too heavily on the book, though, as the book was disjointed, and he wanted the story again to be that more streamlined look. So he literally told Clemens, don't even read the book. You don't need the book. You just need the main crux of what the book is about.
Crux of what's going on.
So while most of Pete's stories, like his storylines, were discarded, the personality of all the characters still remained into what we see in that in the final movie. Mm-hmm. The story was kept really simple, with the characters really driving the story. Again, Disney was much more active in the storyboarding of this one, helping create a lot of the visual gags and the emotional sequences. And again, was very much more on hands in the story that he had been in years at this point. Because again, he was really focused on Disneyland Park and Disney World Park and the TV shows. So Clemens did change King Louie to be more of a comedic character after having the Sherman brothers write a jazz style music for his scene. And he also added in a human girl as a love interest, as falling in love was the best excuse for Mowgli to leave the jungle. So Disney wanted to cast celebrities as voice actors, which was not very popular before this time. It was one of the first animated films to really cast major celebrities. So Phil Harris ended up being cast as a few of the characters, with child actor David Bailey as Mowgli. But puberty hits again, right? And David Bailey couldn't keep going. So the director, Wolfgang Reitherman, once again cast his younger son, Bruce, to replace him.
Getting a lot of work there.
So now Bruce had already done voice acting for Christopher Robin in the Winnie the Pooh, so they all felt like it was fine for him to play Mowgli as well. And I did want to note, they did look into casting exchange students from India into the film, but this ultimately just didn't work out. So while in previous films, one animator was assigned to do the work on one character's full animation, so for instance, like Mark Davis did all of the animation for Aurora and Maleficent, right? In this movie, they had the animators do it in sequences instead. Because many of the characters interacted with one another so many times anyway, going by sequence made a bit more sense rather than going character by character. So they used that Xerox style again and repurposed some animation from previous films as well. So for instance, some of the walking scenes of Mowgli is the same as walking scenes as Arthur from The Sword and the Stone. And there's actually a lot of really cool, videos you can find out there of the scenes side by side of them walking in the same sequence. Same. Even with some with like Christopher Robin too. Same thing with the Dalmatian puppies being redrawn as cubs from 101 Dalmatians. You can see those like scene by scene, the cubs and the, side by side, it's almost the same. The music was composed by George Bruns, and 6 original songs were written, with 5 being by the Sherman brothers and 1 being Terry Gillickson. The Jungle Book was released on October 18th, 1967, 10 months after Disney's passing in 1966. The premiere served as a fundraiser for the Los Angeles Zoo, and with a budget of $4 million, the movie grossed over $11.5 million and was considered an instant hit as well. By the end of its initial run, it grossed over $23.8 million worldwide and was considered the most successful initial run for an animated film, so not including re-releases. The film received such high praise as well too, though undoubtedly many people today say that high praise was probably influenced through the nostalgia of Disney's passing right before the film came out. The main critique of the movie is of King Louie, as some people feel like he's a caricature of African Americans, though this was not intentional by the animators, as they actually based a lot of King Louie's mannerisms off his voice actor, who was Louis Prima.
Yeah, Louis Prima.
And Louis Prima, of course, was a very famous Italian-American jazz performer of the time, so they said like that wasn't intentional for them, they were just basing off the guy who voiced him.
Basing it off of him. That's why I said when I think of that, it's just like, yes, the way he walked around and danced and the jazz music, yeah.
So, all right, let's get into some final thoughts then. So the Silver Age, again, marked Disney Animation Studios as a time that lush background art, visual style, and integration of classical and popular music. The movies are all driven by music in some way, shape, or form, and again, that music really shaped and identified this specific age or this era. So technically, in a technical speaking, this era saw both refinement and innovation. So films like Alice in Wonderland and Sleeping Beauty demonstrated that experimental uses of color and stylization, with the latter using that Super Technirama 70 widescreen, presentation. Whereas 101 Dalmatians again introduced that Xerox process by transferring again the animators' drawings directly to the cells, which was such a cost-saving measure. It literally saved the animation studio, right? So the Silver Age is Disney Animation's reaffirmation as a dominant animation studio after the wartime era of the World War II. And even if the film wasn't considered successful on first release, basically all of these films went on to be cultural phenomenons in their own right, except for maybe Sword in the Stone, as the movie did not become as popular.
Yeah, but again, that's the only one I could say that out of those movies.
Yeah, that idea though of the Sword in the Stone, of course, is still very iconic to this day though. All right, so let's do just a few fun facts now. So I only have a few here for this, for the 4 here. So first we have Sleeping Beauty's score was the first true stereo soundtrack. It was recorded with the Gronuk Symphony Orchestra from September 8th to November 25th in 1958. In May of 1989, Mary Costa, who is the voice for Sleeping Beauty, she sued the Walt Disney Company for royalties of $2 million owed to her since the 1986 home video release of Sleeping Beauty. So Costa said that her contract with the studio prevented it from producing phonographic recordings or transcriptions for the sale to public without her permission, and the case was settled out of court by June of 1991, with Costa receiving an undisclosed sum, so no one knows what she received. But again, it's like the Peggy Lee from Lady and the Tramp really set the stage for that, right? Of saying like, just because something is innovative in the future doesn't mean we shouldn't still get paid our royalties. So Bill Peets, remember, so the one that he walked out of this Disney animation studio. Years later, he admitted in his autobiography that he's glad. Yeah. So when Bill Peet had left the animation studio, he didn't say anything to Disney. Basically, he just decided that he was going to walk out. He basically said nothing as he left. And years later, in his autobiography, he admitted that he was glad he didn't insult Disney over the film because he didn't know Disney would pass away 2 years later. And of course, again, like with Ken Anderson as well, he didn't want his parting words with Disney to be, on a negative note, basically. And The Jungle Book, of course, is the last film Disney had put his own personal touches on before his passing in 1966. So that kind of wraps up our silver era, our silver age, our 8 movies here that we have. So what were the 8 movies again? Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, The Sword in the Stone, and The Jungle Book. So those are our 8 films there. Yeah, so that was the silver era. What do you think, Mom?
Well, I liked half of those movies. Some of those movies, I wasn't a big Jungle Book or Sword in the Stone. Then at my age, when they came out, it wasn't something that I was interested in.
All right, well, up next, we will eventually get into what the next era is. The next era is called the Bronze Age. So very exciting for the Bronze Age. We'll get into that next. But for now, let's just do a little bit of Disney news. So basically, I'm just going to cover everything that's coming to the Disney parks in 2026 really quick, because there's a lot coming in 2026, and that's basically the main news that we got going on right now, right? So first up, in this kind of in chronological order a little bit, Frozen Ever After animatronics are coming in February of 2026, reportedly. I wonder if we'll see that happen. That'll be exciting. Big Thunder Mountain is reopening in the spring. Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin is also supposed to reopen with his new blasters, also in the spring. Soarin' Across America is coming, also in the spring. Lots happening in the spring. Bluey and Bingo are coming to the Animal Kingdom's Conservation Station in the summer, so that will be very exciting. A lot of people were saying, it's like, how is that train going to handle the influx of people trying to go see Bluey and Bingo?
Yeah, I know. That little train.
I know, right? The new Smuggler's Run adventure with the Mandalorian and Grogu is also supposed to premiere this summer. Rock and Roller Coaster, of course, is being rethemed to the Muppets, also supposed to open in the summer. Disney Junior Mickey Mouse Clubhouse is also supposed to open in the summer. That's in Hollywood Studios. The Magic of Disney Animation is also supposed to open late summer in Hollywood Studios. Apparently, there is a Wonderland-themed playground that's also opening in Hollywood Studios, which I actually did not know about until I was doing this. I was like, oh, okay, didn't know there was a new playground coming. And Level 99, which is a new gaming thing, basically, is coming to Disney Springs, and there was no open date for it yet. So, all right, so just some new things coming to Disney, things for us to look forward to. It's so crazy talking about the 1960s and 1950s and be like, well, what's happening now in the 2020s?
What's happening
right?
now?
So,
yeah, so much has happened between the 50s and now.
I know, right? But all right, that leaves us with our final segment of the podcast today, our Disney memory. Do you have a Disney memory for today's podcast?
I don't have another memory. Do you have a memory?
Well, I mean, I guess I feel like when I was doing this research, the shocking one to me actually was the success of 101 Dalmatians. I feel like because I never thought that one to be such a successful and famous movie in comparison to some of these other movies.
Oh, see, I did. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't for some reason. Okay. I feel like when I was a kid, that one kind of just brushed past me. I never really paid attention to it, didn't really watch it. It was just there, and then it was just kind of gone for me. What's funny is that I remember the live action movie that they did for it, and again, that
was great. Yes, even I remember.
I'll say that too.
One.
For both of these episodes, I didn't really talk about the legacy of some of these movies of the live actions, the video games, the merch that kind of came afterwards.
That's what I mean. Some of these became such iconic. When you were talking about the difference iconic, some of them became so iconic that over the years, with their re-releases and with everything else, and just references to them and scenes that came out of them, they become so iconic that you forget that they just started off as a box office hit or miss or whatever. And I was, like I said, thank God, I was too young to understand whether they were hits or not. Some of these movies I saw way later because I was still too young. And it's not like my mother had a lot of money to take us to the movies. My brother was being born at the time when Jungle Book was coming out and stuff. He was only a toddler himself. So it wasn't like we were going to the movies every time a movie came out. So it was just a different lifestyle back then for us, for me. So I didn't see a lot of these movies until they were re-released.
No, that makes sense. Again, 101 Dalmatians was just the most shocking to me was all that, of how much of a hit it was, because I didn't know that. With, again, the alternative, Sleeping Beauty, surprised me that it was such a box office bomb, right? That it didn't do very well. So the complete opposite.
Considering the other princesses.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is, like, if you think of the three iconic Disney princesses, it often is Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty as the first three main Disney princesses. So it's just like, it's just interesting to see things like that too, right? So it's funny. I'll do a quick shout out to Movie Origin Stories. It's another podcast that is available anywhere where podcasts are streaming, and he will compare the original text with the Disney film, and it's fascinating when you listen to some of those. It's truly fascinating. Beauty and the Beast, crazy. The original book of Beauty and the Beast was wild when you get into that book. Yeah, and again, Sleeping Beauty, against the same thing. They only took basically the first half of the fairy tale. The second half of that fairy tale is very different. Yeah, same thing with Beauty and the Beast. Let me tell you, fairies in some of these fairy tales, some of them can be real evil. That's for sure.
But everybody has that opinion about Tinkerbell too, that she's a little bit of a a troublemaker.
I know, right? So, but it's just interesting to see again, like the original source text, and then to see within this era, the only original movie was The Lady and the Tramp that came from Disney's own life, right? So
because that was just an original movie, right?
But all right, thanks everyone for listening. Let us know, which is your favorite movie in the Silver Era? Do you have a favorite movie? Mine is definitely Cinderella. But we'll love to know what your favorite movie is too. You can let us know on our Instagram, Almost Amanda X. I can see my mom thinking it through right now.
Yeah, I'm thinking about which one's my favorite, and I have to say Peter Pan. I think was my favorite.
That's fair, yeah. Again, it's like for me, it's between Cinderella and Alice in Wonderland, but it's definitely Cinderella. Cinderella's always been my favorite. Again, I want to name my cat after the cat in Cinderella. Ended up naming after the original name of Gus instead. My little Dusty Dust, my little Dust boy, which is funny because they always call him Dust too, right? And then Gus ended up being named that. So it was meant to be, that's for sure, my little Dusty. But so Cinderella for me, what Peter Pan for you, so that sounds good. But again, let us know what your favorite film of this era is. Again, we will come back with the next era, the Bronze Era. Again, sometime in the future. I will say these podcasts take a little bit longer for me to prep, so probably not for a few months. Yes. But I like to space them out anyway, right? We like to have a lot of stuff in between, so I like to space things out. But anyway, make sure you give us a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening. Make sure you leave a comment down below. But until then, we'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.